Hey guys, I'm really excited to have Haley Chico share her story with you today. She was undiagnosed with a rare illness from ages 9 to 21, and it has really impacted her physically, where she lives, and how she participates in her community. She was really excited to share her story because she wants to bring awareness about this rare illness, as well as educate others. Thanks for listening.
My name is Haley Chico. I'm 25 years old and from Harrisonburg, Virginia, born and bred.
Awesome. It's a good town.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about kind of the progression of your illness, when you first started getting symptoms and then, up to your diagnosis.
Sure. So when I was 7 years old, I got in a pretty horrific and traumatic bicycle accident. Caused a lot of trauma to my brain, and 2 years later I started showing, when I was 9 years old, I started showing neurological symptoms of something being wrong. I had a lot of headaches, a lot of neck pain and back pain, and nausea and vomiting, and just a lot of pain. And I went to every doctor and every specialist that we could think of, and the big shot hospitals, Johns Hopkins, UVA, all those hospitals, and every test that was done was negative. Every medication given didn't help, and it got to the point where after a couple of years, around when I was age 12, the doctors started to not believe me and say that I was drug seeking or a drug addict, or my parents were enabling my drug addiction, and
because you kept going back in for problems.
Right. I had this pain. I looked fine, and all the blood tests, everything was fine, but I knew I was in pain, and I knew I was vomiting, and they accused my parents of enabling my drug addiction and me being bulimic because I would vomit a lot, and it was a mess, and so that caused a lot of, I developed some traumatic memories from all of that. So from age 9 to age 21, I didn't have a diagnosis, and I started to think, I'm crazy. They're right, I'm crazy, I'm faking, maybe this is all in my head, nothing's wrong, what is going on? And it was just such a dark and hard place to be in. But when I was 21, we got in contact with a neurosurgeon up in Maryland who specializes in a disease called Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, which we say EDS for short because it's kind of a mouthful. My family doctor got in touch with him and wanted me to go see this specialist, and I did not want to go. I thought, this is going to be more negative tests and more no answers, and it's just going to frustrate me and be difficult.
Because that's all you'd experienced.
Exactly. There was the only doctor that believed me at that point was my family doctor, who was a wonderful man, but everybody else dismissed me. So I was sure that was going to happen again. But I went begrudgingly. And the doctor, the neurosurgeon, his name was Dr. Fraser Henderson, he had ordered some, a CT scan and an MRI before the appointment. So I came to the appointment with these films, and he put them in his computer and up on this big screen in his office, and he said, he started taking the mouse and showing me all of the parts that were in my spine and in my brain that were abnormal and sliding, or things just weren't in place where they were supposed to be with my cervical spine and with my brain. And so he ended up diagnosing me with Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome on the spot. I later went to see a geneticist just to get like a official diagnosis, and I do have it, but it's a clinical diagnosis. There's not like a blood test for it.
Interesting.
So he diagnosed me with that, and then he diagnosed me with something called Arnold-Chiari malformation, which is a mouthful. But essentially, how he explained it to me was that, and I could see it on the MRI. It was that, so you have your spine, and then you have this hole called the foramen magnum, and then you have the skull and the brain. And so my brain was beginning to descend out of my skull was what was going on, and it was putting a lot of pressure on my brainstem and causing my brainstem to bend, and I could also see that on the MRI.
Sure.
So before I saw Dr. Henderson, something I forgot to mention, the biggest issue was these fainting spells that I was having. I would pass out every time I sat up, every time I stood up. I was bedbound in a hospital bed in my parents' living room for about a year, and in a wheelchair when I could be. And I was just, I would pass out 80 to 120 times a day.
Wow. Well, and you probably had to, be like on the main floor in a wheelchair because it was so unpredictable. Like they didn't want you like walking down up the stairs.
Exactly.
Like
Exactly. Yeah, and it was quite difficult. I couldn't bathe on my own. I couldn't go to the bathroom on my own. And so when we saw Dr. Henderson and he told us about this Arnold-Chiari malformation, he explained that the bent brainstem was what was causing, he believed, the passing out.
Sure.
So Dr. Henderson is actually one of only 4 specialists in the world on EDS who's a neurosurgeon.
Okay.
So he's a neurosurgeon EDS specialist, and there's only 4 in the world.
Thankfully he's close.
He's only 2.5 hours away, and he's wonderful. And it was so great. At the end of my very first appointment with him, he looked me in the eyes and he said, "By the way, you're not faking." And I was like, okay, I'm in. So he explained that well, let me talk a little bit about what Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome is.
Yeah, no, that would be great, because I feel like I remember going online one time and reading about it, and there seemed to be so many different subtypes. So please go into that.
Yeah, sure. So EDS is a connective tissue disease. It's a collagen disorder. Everything in my body is very stretchy. There's too much collagen. So I'm very flexible, and I'm bendy, and things kind of slide around when they shouldn't be. So there are 6 different types of EDS. Mine is classic EDS is what they call it, and 2 of the types can be fatal. 2 of the types of EDS are not as bad as the others, and the person is able to live a more normal life with it. And then there are 2 that kind of fall in the middle, and I fall in the middle with classic EDS. Okay. So you can actually develop other there's a vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, and they're wondering if I've also developed that. So you can develop other types while you have your one. But I definitely have classic. So anyway, this was the reason, for most people, Arnold-Chiari malformation would be a diagnosis. It would be a disease, a diagnosis. For me, it was a symptom of the EDS. So EDS is kind of the queen bee, if you will, and then there are all of these sub-diseases that it causes, symptoms of it. So the reason that my brain was sinking out of my skull was because there was so much collagen, and it was just slipping. So for example, people with vascular EDS, it's very dangerous if they get pregnant, because when your organs move around as the baby grows and everything, the organs might not go back to where they're supposed to be because they just kind of overstretch because there's too much collagen.
Right. Interesting.
So this is what was happening with my brain. So Dr. Henderson told me that I would need to have surgery as soon as possible, and in June of 2013 I had a very large surgery where I remember he used the word hoist. He said, "I'm going to hoist your brain back where it needs to be." Wow. And he put some titanium plates, rods, and screws. And then he took some of my rib and put it back there to hold everything together, and then some bone marrow from my hip as well to kind of seal it more, I guess. Sure. So, and then he fused my spine from occiput, which is the top, to C2. So just a small fusion, but a little hard to move my head around. So it took maybe 6 to 8 months to fully recover from that. Sure. But once I did, I was symptom free for a year and a half.
Wow. So you were you hadn't felt that since like a very young child. Yeah.
Right. I always say, I don't remember what it's like not to be in pain, and I don't know how to live without being sick. It's kind of a weird thing. It's all I can remember. But eventually I mean, and I was in great shape. I was driving, I was working, I was, you know, just really thriving. And then things started to deteriorate again, and started passing out again, and just the symptoms started coming back. And there's no cure for EDS, so it's really just treatment of the symptoms, and the treatment is surgery usually.
Right.
So it's a lot of surgeries. So I've had many spinal surgeries and a couple of the brain surgeries. But that big one in 2013 was incredibly helpful, but only
it didn't last as long as you had hoped.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure that was just like very emotional to have to go back to where you, like, because you had kind of experienced kind of like this lifting out of your symptoms, and then it started to come back.
Yeah. So, it was incredibly hard to go to that place again, both physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually, and it was a dark time because it's just such an unpredictable disease. It's so rare. I haven't talked about how rare it is. I do think that there are people who have it, but they just haven't gotten a diagnosis because not many doctors know about it.
Right.
Like, I'll go to a hospital if I'm in the ER and they'll say, what kind of medical conditions do you have? And I say Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. And they're like, how do you spell that? What is that? You know?
Right. And they're like looking it up.
They literally will take their phones out and look it up. So I have to explain it to my doctor, which is weird. But so a lot of doctors don't know about it, and there's not a ton of education regarding EDS. So I think that there are more people that have it and just aren't diagnosed, but it is incredibly rare.
So tell me what it was like. So this was from, you were in elementary school, middle school, high school. So what was this like going through school and having, all of these symptoms?
It was incredibly difficult. I missed all of my 4th grade year, half of my 6th, half of my 8th, all of my 9th, all of my 11th, and half of my 12th.
Wow.
So I graduated on time miraculously, not because I'm very smart, but my parents have been so great about they put me in private school so that obviously there are state regulations that you need to meet or whatever, but I guess it's a little more strict in public schools. Like, I would probably still be in high school if I had gone to a public school. But I graduated on time with my class because this private school was able to work with me and kind of not bend the rules, but adjust how things needed to be and just really work with me, and I'm so grateful for that.
So did you have people come to your house to catch you up on stuff? Like, how did that work? Because your parents were probably working and they weren't homeschooling you or anything.
Right. No. Right. So there were a few ladies in our church who would tutor me, and I had one of my closest friends was homeschooled, and so she's my age and my grade, and when I was sick, I would go over there and I would kind of learn her lessons with her mom and her, and it was incredibly helpful. And then my high school would send tutors, and my dad was a math teacher and would help me with that a lot. They were just incredibly flexible and helpful and wanted to do everything they could to help.
No, that's awesome that even through all of that, you wanted to and needed to graduate, and so I'm glad that you guys were able to figure that out.
Thank you. Me too.
So you talked a little bit about just needing a lot of help to do some of your daily tasks, like bathing, dressing, especially when you were fainting and using a chair. So tell me a little bit about the home. You were in your parents' home, I guess, at that point. So tell me about what you had to do to make it work for you while you were kind of going through this phase.
Sure. So one of the big things was we had to have a ramp installed or made for the few steps on the porch to get into my parents' house.
Sure.
We had to get a hold of a hospital bed through one of those pharmacies or renting agencies.
Sure.
And I had home health nurses who would come by and be with me daily and give me my medications and things, and occupational therapists who would, yeah, there you go, who would just help me, and physical therapists, and people who would just, bathe me and anything that I needed. It was a bit of a zoo.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and just one of the biggest problems was going to the restroom because the wheelchair would not fit into the door.
And this is on the main level of your house?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the only bathroom I could use on the main level, the wheelchair wouldn't fit through. So I had a couple steps to get to the toilet, and I would just go down. And that was, because like I said, I couldn't stand without passing out. So that was an issue, and then bedpans happened, and it was a crazy, crazy time. It feels crazy just even talking about it.
Sure.
It's so weird.
Well, and at that age, like that's not what your peers, like your typical way of doing things. And
right.
so sure, it was just frustrating to just be like, I just need to get into the bathroom, and you can't go in there.
Yeah.
And so in that bathroom, did it have a shower in there?
It did not. So they would bathe me on the bed. They got awesome ways of doing stuff. Yeah. And I don't know how, but there were little bathtub things that I would put my head in, and they've got it down to an art, but I couldn't go up the stairs. It was too dangerous. I had taken some rolls down the stairs and gotten some pretty significant concussions, so we weren't gonna risk that.
Yeah. And then so then you moved out of your parents' house and now live in an apartment. So kind of talk about the difference in features between the two. Like, has it been helpful to live in a different setup?
Yeah, it definitely has. I moved into my apartment when I was 24. Like you were saying, just the peers my age, everybody, all of my friends are getting married and moving out and having kids, and I was stuck in this hospital bed in my parents' living room, and it was incredibly difficult, just emotionally, and took a real toll on my self-esteem and everything. And so when I was finally able to move into an apartment, it was wonderful, and I love my parents, and they're only 2.7 miles away now, so we're good. But
you're close enough if you need them.
Exactly. But it was like a sign of my independence, and that was it was a huge moment. I just sobbed the first day when I got the key. I just sobbed because it was this monumental moment.
Yeah.
I was driving. I was in my own apartment. I have a dog. It's just amazing how things can change.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. In terms of what other people don't know about EDS and how it impacts your life, what are some things that you want people to know about how it impacts you daily?
It's a very good question. There are a lot of things. I think one of them being weakness. I was recently at a Target and parked in a handicapped spot with my handicap thing because I'm weak, and at times I need to use it, at times I don't. And as I was getting out of the car, this older woman walked by and said, you should really save those for people with real disabilities. And it just I was like, whoa. It was like I was punched in the stomach, and I was just so hurt by that because it's invisible. Yeah, there's nothing. I don't look sick. I get it, but there's a lot going on that people don't understand. I always say there's the pain that I experience and that we experience, people who have EDS. Anything that's chronic, it doesn't get any easier.
Sure.
The pain is just as bad today as it was 16 years ago when it appeared when I was 9. I've learned coping mechanisms, but it hasn't gotten any better. It's still just as painful. So, and I think too, I wish that people would understand, we get good at putting a face on. And it can be hard to, so a lot of people will ask me, how are you feeling? And I'll say, if I'm not doing well, I'll say, not great, I'm hanging in, but not great. And they'll say, well, you look great. And that's really kind and sweet. But it also sometimes can feel a little dismissive of, well, you look great, so you must be fine. Yeah, but that's just not the case.
You're like, you don't know how long it took me to get ready this morning.
Exactly, and to put this smile on, and you don't know what's going on inside, and that I was just in the bathroom vomiting, and I was in the ER last night. It's just things people don't know, and they don't mean, in most circumstances, to be cruel, but it can be difficult to, when they ask. I just wish people would accept the answer. If I say I'm not doing well, that they would say, I'm so sorry, or I understand, or something, and rejoice with me when I am doing well, and celebrate that too. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. So mainly weakness, and just the fact that things change for you daily,
and exactly that things can go so quickly in a different direction. That I have there have been a lot of days where I'm great, and then at night I start vomiting and uncontrollably and need to be at the ER. And sometimes I feel like it's a little bit like living two different lives, just in that it's so different. But it would be great if people could understand that, just because I look okay today, it doesn't mean that tomorrow I will be. So, yeah, I guess just awareness, and kind of there's a lot of, there are little things like walking in the grocery store is difficult. Like I have to always have a cart, even if I'm just getting like deodorant or something, because I need it to lean on. And often I have to use the little scooter, and I don't think that people don't understand that every step can be difficult. Can be hard. Can be, I'm panting after going up the stairs, or
Well, and it depends how far things are apart. At a huge store. I mean, if you're like, okay, I need deodorant and something that's like on the other end, then you might choose the motorized cart versus like a regular cart. I know you talked about how sometimes you would drive and sometimes you wouldn't. So how has this impacted transportation and getting from place to place?
So when I was passing out, obviously I couldn't drive, and the rule is if you pass out and lose consciousness, you're not allowed to drive for 6 months.
So it's kind of like a seizure rule in a way.
Exactly.
Okay.
So obviously when I was passing out 80 to whatever times a day, I couldn't drive. And that was difficult, having to rely on others at 21 after having my license for so many years. I mean, not a ton of years, but for some years, and then it's taken away, and that was really difficult, especially emotionally. And so now there are times when I start to feel dizzy. I don't pass out like I used to, but I have to be very aware and honest with myself about if I need to call an Uber. And I check in with my family doctor constantly. I see him weekly, and then there's the neurosurgeon. If I ever were to pass out, I have to get the clear from both my family doctor and my neurosurgeon to drive again. And I am so overly careful about I don't, it's not worth it. Like I'll pay the $15 for an Uber. So I just have to be aware of my body, and I've never ever passed out behind the wheel. And the other thing is that most of my passing out happens when going from sitting to standing. So I'm not gonna, I've never like passed out just sitting there.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And I guess that's a good thing.
Right, exactly.
So Uber, have you ever, like, I guess we do have public transportation in our town, but have you used buses or taxis or anything like that?
I haven't. I have used taxis a few times for rides home from the ER in the middle of the night, so that I wouldn't disturb my parents or friends. But Uber's more affordable.
Yeah. Well, and that's a neat, like, it's a newer option that hasn't been around for a while. So it's nice that that's available around here.
Well, and the other cool thing is that, you know, we go to this huge church, and there are so many people who are willing and ready to just come and transport me when I need it. I rarely have to call an Uber. And my dad owns a painting business, and he makes his own hours, and he can take off to take me to, you know, Maryland or wherever I need to go.
Appointment or something.
So I'm very blessed in that sense, but super blessed that I'm able to drive right now. So.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So how has EDS impacted how you do things in the community for leisure, recreation, social activities?
It's impacted it significantly. Even just kind of silly things, like at my church I lead, I'm a leader for the College and Career Fellowship, CCF is what we call it, but it's kind of like the college Sunday school, if you will. And we have events a lot of times like ultimate frisbee or volleyball and things that I can't do. Or going, this is, you know, something that I don't think people would think about, but going to like the Christmas parade where it's packed, I have to be ready and able to find a bathroom if I need to, so that I can either throw up or I have to take shots of anti-nausea medication because I'm constantly vomiting. So I regularly take shots, like pretty much hourly, and so I need the bathroom for the vomiting or for taking a shot, because I don't want to just pull that out and do it. And so stuff like that can be difficult, just being in a big crowd and not having access to something like that,
or not even knowing what would be open, or if you could jump into a store or something,
and it has to be quick. It's when it hits, you know, when the nausea hits or the vomiting hits, you know, it's go time. Like I can't be wandering around looking for something. I need it now,
right away.
But and also things like you know, so my best friend and I had been planning a trip to Dollywood like since 8th grade, and we got to go, and it was so hard. It was so hard, and I didn't expect that. Just the walking was incredibly difficult, and my body just couldn't handle it, and it was really sad. So things like that too, and roller coasters I can't go on, and because of my brain and my neck,
and brain. So I'm sure, because a lot of social activities that friends like, or people your age are typically, well, hey, let's go do this really quick over the weekend. I'm sure there's planning and consideration on your part that you have to think through. Is it worth it to me to go and hang out, or like assessing how you're feeling? I'm sure it's just like a daily, hourly thing for you.
And there are things like I have a feeding tube in my stomach, and I have what's called a Hickman, which is like a large IV that goes into the ventricles in my heart, that I can take medications through. And so, you know, if my group of friends will sometimes go to a lake or something, I can't do it. I can't get those things wet. So there are constant things like that. Like I have to take baths, not showers, and it's difficult. But I do find that it's a constant battle of what's going to be best for me emotionally and what's going to be best for me physically. So sometimes I have to say no because I can't do it physically. But other times I can't. I need to be with my friends, and I need to be with people that it's worth the risk of the physical distress that it may cause to be with them doing whatever activity they may be doing.
That makes
because
sense.
for my emotional health. So it's kind of, I have to figure out, okay, what do I need today? What is more important? And, what's the bigger issue?
I've heard other people with chronic illness say the same thing. It's like they have to balance like exactly what they need at that moment and if it's worth it for them. Like if I do this now, how much am I going to pay for it later?
Exactly. And I think at least for me, my emotional health is connected to my physical health. When I'm really upset or sad or depressed or having a lot of anxiety, my physical symptoms get worse, and vice versa. When my physical symptoms get worse, I react worse, badly emotionally. And so it's kind of this cycle. So it's hard because I have to say sometimes it's risk versus benefit, basically. And you just have to assess each different situation individually.
Yeah.
How you are that day. So
That makes sense. Let's see. Is there anything in your community that you would want to change to make it easier for you to participate in things?
Yeah, I touched on the bathroom thing a little bit. I don't really know how that would happen, but that's something that porta potties everywhere maybe.
Or even just knowing like where they would be in an establishment, so you're not having to hunt for them.
Right.
Because sometimes they're in the back, sometimes they're in the front.
Right. I think another thing that would be, it seems so little and so not important, but benches around outside are extremely helpful when I get worn out. And I think that just ways that are things that would be helpful for me to be able to rest or just take a minute or catch my breath, whatever.
And another person I interviewed actually said that exact
same
thing.
Really?
Yeah, because she was saying that just at a park, if you do go on a walk or something like that and you want to sit down, like you would just have to sit down on the ground.
Right.
But having benches, and she said benches with backs, so she could actually rest. But you even see like at Walmart, they've got like benches near the pharmacy so people can rest. But especially in big stores like that, and you're walking around and
exactly. And if you're at the very back of the store, like I've had this happen before, where I'm like getting dog food, and that's way in the back of the store, and I all of a sudden, this just happened last week. I all of a sudden just can't do it anymore. I had to call my mom to come pick me up because I got to a point where I couldn't even walk to the front of the store to sit down or to my car. I just sat down in the aisle of the dog food aisle, and waited for my mom. And that happens a lot. So, things like that, just maybe more kind of awareness of where to put benches and things, that's helpful.
Sure. No, that's really good advice. I think a lot of people would benefit from that. What advice do you have for people who is interacting with you, who may be just curious about EDS? Like, are you normally open to answering questions, or I'm sure you've had comments that have not been so helpful too. So
advice that I would give, honestly, you just said it. Ask me. And I think don't treat me as if my value and my worth and my identity is the illness. It's a balance, because it's helpful when people understand the illness and understand my needs, but there can be a point where that becomes what I am.
Right.
So my advice would be to ask questions, research it even, and when advice for talking to like my family members, there are only so many people in the world who know exactly what I'm going through, and it can be very isolating. So just listening is helpful, and honestly, this one for me is particularly important because of my past with doctors not believing me, taking me at my word. If I look great and I say, man, I'm not doing well, take me at my word, rather than say, well, you look fine, you're all right, let's go, because of my past. I think that's important for anyone, but especially because of my past, it hits a nerve, it's a soft heart, it's a spot in my heart that is difficult when people kind of dismiss what I say.
Well, and because this is so rare, like, have you ever had an opportunity to meet someone that has this in person? Because I know it's easier to do online, but
yeah, I have. So a cool story, when I had my surgery in 2013, I was 21, and there was a 19-year-old girl from Canada who had it. We actually coordinated online. We needed to switch our surgery dates, our surgery times. They were on the same day, but we needed to switch the times. And so, I got her slot, she got my slot, and we were in rooms right next to each other. And about, she recovered in like 3 days, whereas I was there for 18. Just because everybody reacts differently to EDS, and the recovery process. But 3 months later, when she came down, so like I said, she lives in Canada, so 3 months later when she came down for her post-op visit, I was like, okay, you're only 2.5 hours away in Maryland, like, come stay with me and come visit. And so she and her mom came and stayed for 4 days with us, and we went to the zoo, and it was so great. We went on scenic drives, and kind of showed her the country life, and it was so great to just not have to worry about her understanding, and to be completely accepted when I say, if I were to say, I'm tired, we have to stop, and to accept her when she says that too.
Right.
So it's such a valuable relationship to me. And there was a lady during that same hospitalization with my big surgery, who had a procedure, was out in 2 days, and ended up bringing me things in the hospital. And she lives in New Hampshire, so she was gonna just stay in Maryland for 3 weeks until her post-op, so she would visit me daily. And now we're connected online, but I still talk to them on the phone.
That's awesome.
And besides that, there are the big Facebook groups and things like that, which is helpful. But to know these people, and to have such a kind of intimate understanding of what we're going through, because we're the only ones who can know exactly what it's like. Sure. It's invaluable.
Yeah. So. Yeah, no, we experience that too with individuals with spinal cord injury, and there's a couple that we know near DC, and when we hang out, it's like, we only know each other through spinal cord injury, but we found out that we have a lot in common, but you can still have banter and kind of joke back and forth, because you know the life, know what each other is experiencing, and you can empathize in that. So
yeah, and I think I think there's something. EDS might be the thing that brought me and this girl Sarah, together. But there's a bond that you form because of it that lives on in spite of it, kind of, if that makes sense. So we became friends because of EDS, but we have stayed friends because of who we are as a person, not because of who our illness makes us. Right. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And that was just the first connection.
Right. Exactly.
So do you have any advice for community businesses or organizations to make things more welcoming for you?
I do wish there was some sort of, so if I pass out in like a grocery store, which I've done, of course they call 911. And what they don't realize is that that's my norm, and of course that's what they should do and they legally have to do. But I think listening to just, I so value when people listen to me. And, you know, I understand that, of course, they have to call the ambulance, but also not freaking out and just kind of, and that's not anyone's fault. They, you know, when they do freak out, it's because they're worried and they care.
Sure.
But again, I guess it goes back to awareness. I just wish there was.
Do you have like any, like, I know some people carry like cards on them that explain.
You know, I don't, but that's a really, because it's such a hard thing to nutshell.
Yeah.
And every person with EDS, every case is different. So, you know, it would be helpful, I think, to get something like that. I just don't know what I would say. On it.
Right. Well, and I've heard of people saying too, like, especially if they have like a physical disability and they fall, some people have learned how to get themselves up on their own, but usually it's kind of the same thing you described, as people rushing over and making the situation bigger than it needed to be, because it is like, fainting is something that, okay, I deal with, I can, you know, but yeah.
And I think too, when that kind of stuff happens, it's embarrassing. And, you know, if I say this happens, you know, I don't want to ever underreact, but I don't want to overreact. So it's this kind of balancing act. And I check in with my doctor all the time over the phone, saying, okay, this is happening. Is this worth an ER visit, or are we good? You know, so. You know, people in the grocery store don't understand that, and that's fine. But I think I would love if there were more awareness in the community, and if people would listen and try to ask questions and
understand.
Yeah,
and I think that goes with anything, because especially because you're it is invisible, and they don't expect that anything else would be going on. I mean, I think a lot of people feel that with chronic illness, that just having people be aware and know that, you know, there could be something else going on that's not what they think on the surface.
Exactly.
So has EDS impacted your relationships in any way?
Oh yeah, for sure. My relationships with my siblings are very different. I have 4 siblings. They're all older. 3 brothers and a sister, and I'm very close with my sister, very close with one of my brothers. I'm close with all of them. We're like, when I say that I'm close with my sister and one of my brothers, I mean like insanely close, because we're all close anyway.
Sure.
But we're a big Italian family. We kind of have to be. But you know, it can be. Everybody has an opinion, and there have been times where my other 2 brothers have wondered about the validity of this illness, and that is the most hurtful, because they know my character, and so it feels kind of like an attack on my character. And so we go to counseling, we work through it, and I mean, we really are all so close. But there's one brother and my sister who they just get me, and I think it's because my brother is married to a woman who has seizures, and her father is blind, and you know, so he's used to this kind of suffering stuff, and it doesn't freak him out. And I think a lot of times a defense mechanism is to withdraw, because like in romantic relationships, there are pretty much every time something about the disease comes up, it's whoa, and it's either because I don't want to deal with that, or it's because I care a lot about you and I'm not interested in watching you suffer.
Right.
Which are both understandable. And but yeah, so it's impacted all of my relationships, really.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and then the amount of you know, back and forth with appointments and you know, figuring things out. I mean, it we always say that illness and disability doesn't just impact you know, it doesn't just affect that person.
Exactly.
It impacts everyone because, I mean, you all feel some sort of effects.
Exactly. And, you know, I always say I might be the most obvious one that's suffering from this or that's being affected by this illness, but it affects my family, it affects my church, it affects my friends, it affects everyone that I come in contact with. So it's not just about me.
Sure.
I just am the kind of the center of it and kind of the obvious one. But, you know, watching my parents, this is so silly, but it seems so silly, but my nephew recently had an ear infection. And he's a baby. He's like 8 months old, so he can't talk. But he was just inconsolable and just sobbing and crying. And all I wanted to do was take it away and go through it for him or whatever for an ear infection.
Right.
So I realized at that moment, it seems so silly, but I realized I think it would be so much harder to be my parents and my loved ones than it would be to be me. And in different ways.
Sure.
That probably sounds extreme, but I think that the helpless feeling of watching someone you love suffer so much, not knowing what to do, not having any kind of power, is just heartbreaking, heart-wrenching. It's just the worst. And I got a little taste of that with this ear infection thing, but
the short-term thing.
Right. So I just, you know, I have to remember to give people grace when they do have those defense mechanisms coming up, because it all, especially with my siblings and my family, it does stem from how much they love me. So, and same with the romantic thing, like I mentioned, it stems from, it's not a selfish thing when people withdraw, usually. Right. Sometimes it is. But it's usually not a selfish thing. It's just something, it's just a reaction. And it's because nobody wants to be so helpless, you know, watching someone suffer.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So is there anything that you wish more people knew about you? Okay, I love to sing and dance. Okay, not dance, actually. Just to sing. I like to try to dance. But I love musical theater, and it's kind of difficult because it's maybe one of the worst things I could love with this illness, because it would be very difficult to do any kind of musical theater with this illness. But I do love it, and I enjoy singing, like at weddings or in church. It just brings a real joy. I've always had a connection to music, and you know, I don't know if I wish more people knew it about me, because I think most people already do. But I guess what I wish is that would be a separate thing from my illness. That would be who Haley is, a part of who Haley is, not a part of EDS. And if that makes sense. Yeah, like you don't want to just be associated, oh, that's the girl that, you know.
Right, that likes music because she's sick or likes to sing, you know, but that's just the passion of Haley.
Yeah.
You know, it's just something about me and me alone, not my illness.
Yeah. Well, and when you had that, I guess was like a year and a half after your surgery, you were able to do some plays and stuff like that.
Yeah. I did like 3 musicals, and what was it? I was in tap dancing lessons.
Nice.
Can't do it anymore, but like, you know, so there are, I mean, who knows what God has in store, and nothing is impossible with him, and I don't know what's going to happen, but you just have to kind of, my doctor always says to me, you know, people will say, take things one day at a time, one day at a time, one day at a time. But sometimes one day is just too overwhelming. Sometimes 1 minute is too overwhelming. So my doctor always says to me, do the next thing. So that's super helpful for me, because I don't know what it's going to look like this evening.
Sure.
I don't know how I'm going to be feeling. But, you know, the next thing is to continue to speak to you, and then to get in my car, and just taking it step by step.
Because the next 24 hours could be way overwhelming to think about.
Exactly.
That's really good advice.
Yeah.
I've never heard that advice before.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that you'd like to share about you, or about how this has impacted your life? Anything that we didn't go over? Because sometimes there's always something that we didn't get to. So.
Right. The biggest the biggest thing for me, most important thing in my life, is my relationship with the Lord, with Jesus. And it's interesting because there's a growth in my spiritual walk that has happened because of my suffering. That is a beautiful, glorious thing that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't suffered. And I'm not saying that I have a better relationship with God or anything. Sure. It's all different. But I get to see God through the lens of suffering. And I think that is really a glorious thing. And I think suffering's at the heart of the gospel. And so sometimes I hear myself, I'll say, like, I'm so grateful to have been chosen to suffer for God's glory. And then literally, like, right now, as those words come out of my mouth, I'm like, what? No, you're not. You're not grateful for this. And I feel like Smeagol and Gollum, like, fighting back and forth. But in a weird way, I am, because it's the relationship and the faith that the Lord has given me is, invaluable. It's priceless.
It's like that's the way he's chosen to reveal himself more to you.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what anchors me is Jesus. I mean, I honestly don't think I would be alive if I don't know how I could be alive if I didn't have relationship with him and believe that he is sovereign and he is in control, and none of this takes him by surprise or is too big for him or throws him off the throne. And there's such a sense of peace in that, that I can't do anything to mess up God's plan for my life. Like, I just got chills just saying it, because it's so freeing that this is where he has me. And I often, I was talking to a friend recently and I said, I wish I could work, I wish I had a job, whatever. And he said to me, but your job right now is to be sitting in your bed crying because you're in pain, because that's what I was doing at the moment. And it was an interesting way of putting it, that's my job right now. Like, that's what God has called me to do right now. And so I do it. And yeah, it takes pressure off, and it's just, there's such a peace in that.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's hard for some people to understand too. Like, and so I'm sure that, not only are you describing, EDS and that's hard for people to understand, but how you're able to find peace and comfort in knowing that God has a plan for your life even through the suffering. And I'm sure that's hard for people that suffer a little bit or suffer a lot if they haven't experienced that before.
Yeah. And I always, as long as I can remember, I always wanted to be a missionary in Mexico particularly. And I went there one year. I was in 10th grade, something like that. Just for like 10 days with our church. And it was during a period when I wasn't as sick. Sure. Was still struggling, but not as sick. And I loved it. I loved it so much. And I always saw myself as moving to Mexico to do missions work. And then this illness hit at age 9. But what I didn't realize then was that God was sending me my mission field in the illness. There have been many nurses and doctors that I have spoken to who have brought 3 nurses to church, before, and just having, it's amazing how just having my Bible open on the, table in the hospital is people start to ask, or you start to talk about it, or I'm playing a Christian song and they ask, oh, what are you listening to? And this is my mission field. And I didn't realize at age 9 that God was sending me my wisest and most influential teacher, affliction, so I'm grateful. I mean, I'm a missionary.
Right. Yeah, you are. It's a neat perspective to have in that, and most people wouldn't perceive pain and suffering to be a mission field. But I mean, that's an interesting way to look at it, because you're right. I mean, whether you're in the hospital or in a waiting room or you know, or have fainted in Target or something like that, you have an opportunity to talk about him and how he's impacted your life.
Yeah, and that's cool, because it's not just an icebreaker, it destroys the ice. Like, because I have an excuse to be like, you know, a lot of people say, and not to like toot my own horn, but a lot of people will say, how are you so joyful, you know, in the midst of the suffering? And believe me, there are the times when I am the furthest thing from joyful. But that question alone opens up the floodgates for me to share the gospel and to say, this is not me, this is the Holy Spirit working in me. You know, that joy that you see is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, and you can muster that up on your own
if
you try.
Exactly. So it's, you know, I don't have the awkward, like, so how should we, I don't have to think about how I would bring up talking about the gospel or Jesus. I can just, you know, if I tell someone about my illness, or if they see something like me passing out in Target or something, there it is. I can say, you know, but God is in control. I could throw something like that in there, and it leads to a conversation. And it's really neat.
Yeah, that's very true. It does kind of crush that awkwardness right off the bat.
Just destroys that ice.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, and I'm sure this will bring more awareness to EDS, just because, like you said, a lot of people don't know about it, and so thanks for sharing.
Thank you. My pleasure.
As you can see, Haley has endured so much with this illness, but continues to be optimistic about her life. She has learned so many things through her struggles and continues to battle with symptoms daily. I hope you were able to see more into how somebody who looks fine can actually have lots of other things going on under the surface, and how that really impacts where they live, how they participate in their community, and the relationships they have with others. I really appreciate you listening to another story with the Universal Design Project, and I hope you continue to listen in for more stories from individuals that we interview. Have a great day.